Thank you, Joe. It's a thrill to be here, and what a wonderful group that you all do all these different kinds of spiritual things. You may or may not, find that my topic is a expansive topic that may stretch some of you and may not stretch some of you. So we'll let that be as it is. I will briefly tell you my story, and I love that you invite speakers, Joe, to tell their story, because I think that stories not only tell us more about people, but it might be a piece of your story. And I think that sometimes those that are new to the concept of I am a soul and I live lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, that you wonder, well, how did the speaker get into this work and how did that happen? And I'd like to tell my story because I think my story begins from a place of disbelief, okay? And lots of us move from a place of disbelief. So I'll tell you, because you may wonder about this piece of me, and then I'll explain my story. So I began my life in a very in a Western religion. I was raised in I don't know what it means to say a very Jewish household, but it was in fact a very Jewish household. And I didn't believe in anything about reincarnation, okay? So just know that's where I started. And today my Jewish family members would probably roll their eyes if they knew everything that I believed in and that I was into. So here's my story in brief. About 24 years ago, I was minding my own business as a general psychologist. My husband, Earl, was a university professor and administrator, and so he's not a psychologist. People say, well, he's Dr. So-and-so, does he do what you do? Not exactly. I was minding my own business. We have two lovely, beautiful children. They were I think they were out of undergrad at the time, or close to that. And I was part of a group practice, a traditional, conventional group practice there were 3 psychologists and a psychiatrist. I was one of the founding members of the practice, as was my colleague, a man who was 14 years younger than I. And in late 1991, my colleague, whose nickname was Bud, Bud was diagnosed with a very serious type of lung cancer. You see it on TV all the time. It's called mesothelioma. It's a disease that comes from asbestos exposure. And he'd been the child in a parochial school, helping the custodian load the boiler morning and night, morning and night, morning and night. And 20 years later, just like dock workers, some people end up with this, pretty nasty disease. 17 months later, Bud passed from the disease. I didn't believe in soul. I didn't believe in past lives. It's not like I didn't want to believe in it. I was never schooled in the notion of reincarnation. Earl and I had never spoken about reincarnation, and we both have these extensive years of education, but we'd never spoken at all about reincarnation. Bud passed actually the morning after Easter, and right after he passed, within hours of his passing, I started having spiritual experiences that I'd never had before. And I wondered, and I'll explain those experiences briefly, but I wondered, this is weird, how does this work? Am I going crazy? But I knew what, heavy-duty mental illness looked like, and you don't just fall into mental illness when you're 46 years old. It just doesn't work that way. What happened was, within hours to a day of Bud's passing, I knew he was talking to me. I had no doubt whatsoever. I could feel him, and I could interpret certain communications and reminders that were coming from Bud. Now, I bet, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but I bet some of you have heard from your grandparents, heard from your spouses, heard from your friends and siblings and so on and so forth. So I thought, well, how does this work? And I was a little bit spooked, but I knew what I was feeling. Along with that, I really believed that Bud was showing me seeds of past lives. Now, I'd read one of Brian Weiss's books, okay? A client had brought it in one day, probably a year and a half before Bud passed, and she said, here, you have to read this book, Many Lives, Many Masters. I now know Brian Weiss as a colleague. And the client said, you have to read this. So I took it home and I'd read it, but, I didn't know quite what to do with it. When Bud started showing me scenes in my mind, of past lives, excuse me, I knew they were past lives. I don't, you know, if you said, well, Linda, how did you know? It's that inner knowing, that's that feeling that many of us have had. And I knew that Bud was a person in those scenes. The person didn't necessarily look like the man I knew as Bud, but I knew they were past lives. So I turned to Earl. We'd already been married 20 or 25 years. We now know a lot about our past lives, but in this lifetime, we've been together a long time. And I said, honey, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I really and truly thought Earl would roll his eyes and go, oh, you know, what's going on with my wife? And, you know, she's grieving and so on and so forth. And I said, well, here's what's going on. He knew Bud quite well. Our daughter babysat for Bud's young daughter. And I said, don't you think this is crazy? And he honestly said, no, I don't, just very calmly. And I said, why not? And he said, well, here's the story. He said, I must have repressed until now. But when I was a boy, so this just came back to him as I shared this. Again, we're going back 22 years. He said, when I was a boy growing up in Oregon, I remembered my past lives. I knew they were past lives. And I knew where I came from. I knew I was a man. In particular, I knew I was a man and I lived in India. And he said, I just tucked it all away. Back in the middle 50s, he said, I didn't tell anybody because I figured they'd think I was crazy. And he forgot until this spring day in 1993. So Earl said, no, I don't think you're crazy, and I think we need to go learn more about this. So now, 22 years later, this is my life's work. My work is, who are you as a soul? Why did you come into body? For what purpose did you plan your life? Did you come into body to help yourself? Did you come into body to assist others? Both. It's very related to Brian Weiss's work, except that I also guide between lives regression, which is soul level regression. It's related of another colleague whose name is Robert Schwartz. And Rob's work is about how do we plan our lives, and he uses mediums and channels to help clients know how they plan their lives. The bottom line is that we come into body with purpose. We come into body to evolve. We are divine beings. There's nothing that's anti-religion necessarily at all. But we come into body with a purpose and intention, and overall, in an overly simplified way, we come into body to do our own individual evolution so we grow and we progress and we assist others. And at the same time, to be very esoteric, but I also think very purposeful, we come into body to assist humanity to progress. Because as we evolve more and more, I'm sure this fits probably all of you, we really and truly come into body to be of service on this planet. And that's why we're here. It doesn't matter whether you're a psychologist like Linda, or you're a CPA, or you're, you know, a garbage disposal worker, you know, whatever you are. We come into body to advance. It's kind of like in most states, I think most states have a law that says you have to go to school until you're 16 years old. The divine realm requires us to evolve. Not just so that we can evolve as an individual soul, but so that we can affect the evolution of others, and so that we can affect the greater evolution of humanity. So I'm just going to make a couple of comments that I started making notes as Joe was talking, all these kinds of things were coming to me, and I was reminded as I was sitting back here, I know of many of my past lives. And I thought, oh my goodness, here I am in the greater Philadelphia area. I have a past life that I know about from about the mid-1800s into the early 1900s. I know a fair amount of detail. I was a woman. I lived in, I think, central Philadelphia, whatever was, central at that point in time. And I was very involved with the Democratic Party. I was a socialite. And I ignored my family. I ignored my husband, and I ignored my children. Okay? And I share that with you, one, because some of you may know the history around here. I have some hunches about names, but I don't know if my name is correct. That is my hunch. But I think the most important reason I'm sharing that with you as we move along through this talk this afternoon is it's the notion of karma and dharma, okay? So what does that mean, and how do we move through our karma, and how do we live our dharma? When you come into body each lifetime to progress, you come in to clean up faux pas, or karma is just another word. You come into body to clean up where you slipped and fell. And we all slipped and fell many, many times. So that's karma. We bring karmic issues into life today to clean up issues. Okay? Sometimes it's difficult. You know, and I think that people think of karma in a little bit too black and white of a manner. So it isn't quite so black and white as, so if I abuse someone, they're going to abuse me back. Okay? It's not quite that simple. What I know about the past life in Philadelphia is that I was my karma, I was an ignoring wife and an ignoring mother. Okay? Now, I'd like to believe, I guess my spouse and our children can tell me today, I think I'm different than that, but I brought that in to this lifetime. Probably a dharmic piece or a soul intention piece, another description of dharma, is that I was into cultural progress. I was into moving the planet forward by, I don't know how many women were involved in the Democratic Party, so I don't know the history of all of that. But so that's how you plan your lives. And sometimes you'll say, oh, you know, why did I end up in this difficult circumstance? Because you're cleaning up something that came before, and or you're embracing something in a past life that you accomplished, that you need to accept that you accomplished. Okay? So I'm going to read you a part of one client example. Both my books are filled with client cases. And I really believe that the clients need to write the book. So I fill my books with client material. Okay? And I honestly picked a complicated case because I thought, I want you to have something to chew on. Okay? So this is a client. I'm required by the publisher to both produce releases, permission to use client material. All the names are disguised to protect the innocent, so to speak. But I have to provide these cases basically verbatim. Okay? So this client's fictitious name is Maria. Meet Maria, a single professional woman, painfully desiring a child, yet afraid of being female in life today. And as an aside, and she doesn't know why she's so afraid to have a child. Okay? Maria's regression includes 2 past lives and an important time in the spiritual realm. And this is what Maria tells me. I don't tell the client the past life, they tell me. She says, I'm a dark-complexioned, middle-aged man. So if you're a woman today, you've been a man. If you're a man today, you've been a woman. I'm a dark-complexioned, middle-aged man standing outside in a village, alone and barefoot. My pants are a thin, light-colored material, and my shirt is the same fabric. I have dark hair with gray in it, and I'm not well groomed. My son died recently. He was about 8 years old. I'm very sad. Now I'm in an earlier scene. There are 3 men, all very powerful, who are taking my son away. I'm desperate, and I try to grab my son from them, but they scream angrily at me. I feel powerless to save my son. My son looks very frightened, and he may have done something wrong. I collapse to my knees as people of my village hold me back. They put my son against a wall and they start to beat him. They kill my son, but I don't know why. Maybe this is just to control the people. The men leave. I'm completely destroyed, helpless with a broken heart. My son's body is on the floor against the wall. I pick up my son. I don't know where his mother is just now. I take my son's body back to my house. The villagers follow me. We wash my son's body and put clean clothes on him. Then we take my son out to an open area and lay him on the ground. We pray for him and we prepare for his burial. I'm in shock. I don't want to let him go. We cover him with a cloth. I just shut down. Everyone else is devastated too. It's later. I'm in my home. I live by myself. People prepare food for me, but I'm not hungry. I don't want to talk. I'm only a little older than when my son was killed. I get up from the table. I don't want to live any longer. I live where I work now. I just keep on walking. It's hot. I walk until I collapse. There's a lot of dirt here. It's like the desert. I'm alive for some time, but I just want it to be over. I die. Now I'm above my body as the man. This happens repetitively in regressions. The soul steps out of the body easily and observes. I feel that I can understand why I was so devastated and broken. I just gave up. I was a simple good man. I loved my family and felt that I didn't deserve what happened. I loved my son more than anything. The pain of that life still remains. So that's the first regression that I guided with Maria. She began to get a sense of, oh, this is a piece of why I'm so afraid to have a child. I'm afraid because I had a child that died. Okay? And this is what brings into sort of the light of day, if you will, an explanation for fears, phobias, physical pain, relationship issues that we can't explain in life today. It's largely why I moved into this kind of work away from general psychology. General psychology is wonderful, but it doesn't always explain circumstances of our current life. Maria came back for a second regression, which I want to share because I think it's just kind of explains in even more detail. She says, I'm alone outside in the country. I'm barefoot in a lightweight dress. Now, Maria, as a woman in current life, is now in a past life where she's female. I have light-colored hair, blue eyes, and a round face. I'm a girl about 9 years old, and I'm a little bit messy. There's a lot of land with tall grass around me. I'm in the back of my house playing. It's later now. I'm 17. I'm walking to work. My life isn't going so well. I have to work to provide for my family because my father has passed. Now I'm in the store where I work. There's a man who works next door. I'm afraid of him. He's cold and angry and violent. The man comes into the store. He grabs my face. He takes me to a different part of the store. You can imagine where this is going. He rapes me. I just stay at work. No one else is there. I feel helpless and alone, and I'm afraid to tell anyone about what he did. Now it's later. I'm in my room. I'm happy that I'm going to have a baby, but not happy because the man who raped me is the father of the child. I don't like how I became pregnant, but I'm happy. For the first time since my father died, I'm happy. I see the man, the father of my baby, every day at work. Later, I'm at the store. I'm starting to show, and the man is so angry. He has a wife and children. He blames me for the pregnancy. For the first time, I feel that I can stand up to him. As a mother, I'm going to protect my baby and myself. I'm walking home. I notice he's following me. He starts yelling at me. He grabs me from the road and pulls me into the tall grass. He has something in his hand, and he hits me in the head. He's choking me. I'm terrified. I'm worried about my baby. I struggle to fight back. He keeps hurting me. He leaves me lying in the field. I feel cold and alone. I can't get up. I'm so angry and I'm in pain. I die by myself in the field. Now I'm above my body. It's almost like poof. Dying and stepping out of the body is truly so easy. I wanted so strongly to be a mother. I'm glad I stood up to the man, but what he did was not right. Dying and losing my baby was a terrible price to pay. Now I communicate energetically with my mother in that life. This is what you call after-death communication from soul back to someone in body. I want my mother to know that I'm okay and that I'm at peace. I can't see my body as the woman any longer. The soul is beginning to move higher and higher and further into the divine realm. The space around me gets lighter and lighter. I see a yellow-white ball of light that feels welcoming. I'm in the middle of that ball of light. It feels familiar. This is my guide who wants to support me. We all have spiritual guides. Okay? My guide tells me there's nothing to be afraid of, that I'm truly okay. These are simply lessons at the soul level. Obviously in body, they're difficult. But at the soul level, this is learning. Love is bigger and stronger than the physical body. I wasn't a victim, or, my guide says, a better way to see it is that we are all victims in some manner. The man who raped me felt pain as much as I did, though this may be hard to understand and accept. My partner, and this is, I think, the clincher of this past life, and, please know, I'm not telling the client any of this. They're telling me. My partner of today, the client says, is the soul of the man that hurt me. Her romantic partner is the soul of the man that hurt her. Okay? We have karma to release. There is still more time to decide whether the relationship with him will work long term or not. The overriding purpose of my current life is to accept being a woman. I am to learn to be fearless. This is the only way I can become a true companion in a relationship and a capable mother. I am to dedicate myself to expanding my work with energy. She's already been doing energy work in her life. And commit myself to doing healing work with children. I'm told not to let time or money get in the way of forging ahead with learning and building my healing practice. Now, sometimes I read that and I want to say, okay, presentation finished, and, turn and walk away, because it's such a powerful example. Now, all regressions are not filled with that much trauma, and yet the only way that Maria, seemingly, was going to release her fear of having a child was to know, was to get the key to go in the lock and unlock the door. That's what regression often helps us with. And then it helps us with many other things, like, why am I in body? Why did I come into body? Again, I don't have time to share with you all the details, but Earl and I have many, many past lives. When we met on a blind date, when we were 17 and 18 years old, and Earl invited me to a special dance after that first date, I had a bout in the middle of the week between the first date and the second date. I had a bout with what my parents and the doctor thought was appendicitis. Okay? My mother and father took me to the ER early one morning. They weren't sure what was wrong. I didn't have an appendectomy. We did go on the second date, as you would imagine. But the bottom line is, Earl and I have a past life where we were betrothed, and Earl was a military officer a long time ago, and his own men killed him from behind. And I'm fairly convinced that the pain I felt in my body that early morning that my family thought was appendicitis was the pain of loss and the pain of Earl was stabbed from behind. It's thousands of years ago. Okay? So if we talk just about past life regression, and now you can tell I basically guide two types of regression. I guide past life regression, but I guide between lives regression, which expands that model that you might think of as a little bit the Brian Weiss model. It expands it to the point where the regression continues beyond the ending of the past life, and then we work at the soul level. Guides come in. Guides arrive. Guides, sometimes people will say to me, well, Linda, I'm still going to my church every Sunday. And I'm spiritual, but I'm still going to my church, or I'm still going to synagogue, or, whatever it might be. Is that okay? Does that fit with your work? And I say, absolutely. The soul is divine. In fact, you know, classic souls that I view as ascended masters versus tied to any religious dogma come in at times to work as the guides that help the client. So Jesus shows up. Mother Mary shows up. Not always, but sometimes. The soul of Moses, the soul of Buddha, the soul of Mary Magdalene, the soul of Master Saint Germain. They often show up as guides. So what I love about this work is it melds all belief systems, and essentially it's about we came into body to advance as a soul. Okay? We're going to take questions in about 15 or so minutes, because what happens is it's hard to encapsulate. After guiding regression for 22 years, I've learned so much about the soul, because my cardinal rule when I guide regression is I don't tell the client the information, they tell me, essentially. And so I've learned about how do we plan our lives. I've learned about how do we learn who are the souls that we've incarnated with most often. Okay? What's the purpose of our lives? How do we release issues? What happens between lives? What do we do between lives? I can tell you that we don't just, you know, go up there. I don't know why we always think it's up there. We could say out there. We don't just reside in the spiritual realm between lives and sit around and, you know, eat bonbons and, you know, and hang out doing nothing. I used to think, again, I just keep layering on information as I guide clients. I used to think it was a little bit more sedate, and I don't mean to imply that the spiritual realm doesn't have a sense of peace, doesn't have a sense of healing, you know, doesn't have a sense of tranquility, because it does. But our soul has responsibility, we might say. At the soul level, we come here to have responsibility, but in the spiritual realm, we also carry, you might say, characteristic responsibility. In other words, each of us has a different role. Example. One fascinating example is that some souls in spirit are responsible for preparing other souls to incarnate. And there's a place in the spiritual realm that you might call the soul nursery. I almost like to call it like the marsupial soul nursery, okay? Because it's a place, you know, think about a marsupial. What is the little baby kangaroo that's unable to manage comes out of the body of the mommy kangaroo and crawls into the pouch. And the pouch is that nurturing, you know, holding space that prepares that little kangaroo to be able to go walk and go do their own thing. There's a soul nursery, I've heard about it from clients spontaneously who'd never heard of it before, where some of us as souls, our job is to help souls prepare to incarnate. Because where's the hardest place to be? It's not there, it's here. This is the laboratory of learning. This is the crucible. It's almost like we're sandpapered, in a way, here in body, in order to progress. And, you know, we all have circumstances in our life where we have to learn, and learning, just like, you know, Maria's story in body, is how she progresses. Okay? So I think I'll share an experience I had a couple of months ago. I was had the great fortune of being asked to be on the Dr. Oz show. And someone said to me, I didn't want to chuckle about this, but someone said, "Oh, well, Linda, your agent got you on the Dr. Oz show." And I said, "No, I don't have an agent. If I have an agent, okay, these are my agents, okay?" I really believe that's true. And so when I was contacted by a producer on the Dr. Oz show, she said, "Linda, could you come to New York? would you regress clients on camera? And then, you'll sit with Dr. Oz and you'll discuss clips of these regressions. And I said, well, I'd really love to do that. And she said, we're going to find you clients who have bug phobias. And the intention is to uncover a past life or past lives that explain the bug phobias. So I said to this lovely producer, I said, that's great, but I can tell you what may happen. I said, this is my analogy. I'm the driver of the bus in a regression. So I drive the regression so we keep it moving. But the itinerary of the bus of regression is not for me to choose. It's selected at the soul level by the client's guides and the client's higher self to assist the client to evolve. So I said, Lisa is this producer's name, I said, Lisa, if you're accepting that I may not guide a client into a past life that has a thing to do with bugs, or I might, I don't know, I'm happy to come to New York and do this. So she said, well, let me get back to you, blah, blah, blah. And so then she called me back about 48 hours later and said, yes, I want you to come. So we got to the day of the regression. The first client, I had 2 clients. The first client, when I interviewed her, I suspected it would go nowhere for 2 reasons. One, she didn't believe in past lives at all. In fact, she thought that was, kind of a weird concept. And she had a phobia about caterpillars, and she could describe in detail something that happened in her childhood in this life that was tied to caterpillars that I thought easily explained the phobia about caterpillars. Didn't go anywhere. So fine. The second client was a last-minute replacement. Again, and I always trust my guides. My guides were right there taking this whole process forward. So the second client was a last-minute replacement. The person that was meant to be my second client backed out like at 10 o'clock the night before the filming, and this woman was slid into the slot of that person. And this woman was absolutely perfect because she was spiritual, she was open, she was relaxed about this, she had a minor bug phobia. We didn't go to a past life that had anything to do with bugs. We went to a past life that explained her trauma in current life with her mother, who wasn't in her current life, for a part of her childhood. It made it easier for her to forgive her mother. And we explained some experiences she'd had in a past life tied to a man in the past life that was difficult for her when she was a child, that helped her kind of understand issues that were going on in current life with her husband of today. Well, that's how it works. So when clients come in, I say, you're going to uncover what you need to uncover. You're going to uncover what your guides want you to learn about, because they're your buddies. They are your allies, and they want to help you to progress. Now, a lot of clients will say, well, I'm afraid I'm just going to make it up, okay? Or when they're finished, I'm afraid I'm just making it up. I'm just making up a story. And then I take my notes. I record all sessions, but I also take detailed notes. And I go to my notes and I say, well, you said you had on a blue dress with a tear in the left hem of the skirt. You had on tattered shoes and one wasn't even tied. And you said your hair was dirty and messy and you had a little blue hat on the top of your head. And you had this trauma where your mother died when you were 3 years old. Why would you make that up? Okay? The bottom line is that we're all intuitive. And some of you are probably very practiced with your intuition. Some of you that probably regularly have a spiritual practice. I would guess that some of you probably talk to your spiritual guides. Okay? They will talk to you. You have to ask for them to come forward. And they will assist you. I didn't think this years ago. I can be very stuck in my left brain. I went to school a long time, so I had to be pretty intellectual and left-brained. And then I had to learn how to open up my creative, intuitive spiritual side. And once I learned that, information came forward much more easily. So I think at this point there's a lot more that I could say, and I know we're not quite to the 45-minute mark, but what I know when I give a talk is usually there's all kinds of questions percolating in your heads. And your question is probably somebody else's question. There is no question that I don't think that I will find weird, because I'm giving you just a little bit of information. I could talk to you about lives that don't happen on this planet, because that happens. I could talk to you about being in more than one body at once. We could be here for hours, okay? But we're not going to be here for hours. So I think where I want to go now is to questions that are just burning in your brain, or they're not burning, but you want to ask them, that incarnate on Earth that are not from here. Am I correct with your question? Okay. Big topics, interesting, fascinating topics. Soul ray. So you can study, how many of you have heard about theosophy? Anybody studied theosophy? So this is a slight twist on theosophy. Theosophy is about 150-year-old body of information that ties to understanding the soul, why we come into body, soul ray. It's very dense material. You might say it's very esoteric. It's also very fascinating. Many wisdom traditions have talked about something called the 7 rays. Okay? And the concept of the 7 rays, if I boil it down, the concept of the 7 rays is it's like taking divine energy and subdividing it into 7 equal parts that each relates to the next. Okay? None of the 7 are any more important than the other. Okay? So the 7 rays are 7 archetypal energies and archetypal, you might say, styles of being or styles of personality that must be on the planet in order for the planet to progress. As a soul, we have a particular archetype, or one of these 7, that is the backbone of our soul through all of our lives. It's a little bit, let me see if I can think of a good example. Just as an overly simplified example, it's like perhaps you've been a teacher of some sort in every single life. That's the archetype of your soul. Okay? There's a chapter in the Purple Book, in The Evolving Soul, about the 7 soul rays. I won't go into all the details, or then we won't get to other questions. But it helps to understand what is your archetypal soul nature, because it simply says, this is me, this is my orientation. It doesn't change from lifetime to lifetime. It's purposeful, and I'm no better or worse than any other archetype. And I'll give you another quick example. One of those archetypes is a soul energy that is about implementation, logistics, strategy, structure. Okay? It's a fairly black and white, fairly left-brained soul archetype. If that's your soul archetype, that's simply who you are. And that person is usually leaning a little bit more in the linear than the more emotion-based direction as a person. And that's where this one's easy to use, because, and I'm sure Earl doesn't care, this is Earl's soul archetype. I had to understand over time that Earl is a fabulous organizational implementer. That's why he runs our business. He's not extremely touchy-feely. Well, that's who he is. Okay? Then we have archetypes that are much more, and I don't mean to put down touchy-feely, that are much more on the touchy-feely side. That's who that person is. It's not good, bad, it's not right, wrong, it just is. So I would invite you to read that chapter and then send me an email and ask me questions if you have questions. ET souls, where do they come from? Here's my understanding from years of regression. When the Earth was formed, there were no souls on this planet. The original souls that came to populate Earth came from, you might say, elsewhere or extraplanetary. Planets, star systems, interdimensional spaces. So not always a place of density, but often a place of density. In life today, in our culture and population on this planet today, some of us have had most of our evolutionary lives on Earth. This is, again, the tough, as I said, crucible of learning. Some of us, I should say some of you, because I am the first category, have lives from other places. If you're a soul that's had the bulk of your lives extraplanetary, you brought wisdom and evolution with you because extraplanetary locations are already evolved. We're trying to evolve, but we're not there yet. I think it's all of our job to keep helping this planet evolve. Souls from elsewhere primarily brought wisdom from places that were highly evolved, and there are more of those. Let me oversimplify here. There are more evolved souls on the planet right now than there have been in thousands of years. Why? Because we came to be the soldiers on the planet to try to push this planet forward. We're no better than anybody else. We were all young souls at some point in time. Okay? I don't think any of you are young souls. You'd be out enjoying this gorgeous day. You wouldn't be here, listening to Linda give a talk. You were, truly, because I know that you had a horrible winter. So some of us are Earth-based souls. Some of us are ET souls. There are more advanced souls here now, Earth-based and ET. There are more ET souls here now than ever before. Not than ever before, than there have been in thousands of years. Just quick example. Earl and I have 2 married children. We believe we know, our children and children-in-law and Earl and I, we are Earth-based souls. We've been coming here, who knows how long. We like it here. I mean, we really do. We have 3 beautiful, lovely grandchildren. I won't stand here and talk to you about my grandchildren, but we have 3 wonderful grandchildren. They are all ET souls. And they're all ET souls. I don't know specifically from where. Sometimes clients in regression ask that question, and they do learn where the bulk of their lives are that are non-Earth. And sometimes they don't get an explanation. It really varies. You can often tell, I'll give you just another quick comment. Again, there's a chapter in the Purple Book about souls not from here. There are characteristic signs of souls not from here. And these are not like hard and fast rules, but souls not from here may not communicate and socialize as easy as souls from here. I hazard to say that I think the autistic spectrum at times may be a huge misnomer, and that many diagnosed on the autistic spectrum are advanced souls that just simply don't get socialization and communication like we have it, like we Earth beings have it. ET souls can be of any age. Sometimes ET souls have huge allergy issues, chemical sensitivities, nutritional issues. Of our 3 grandchildren, 2 of them are these academic, wizards. They're very advanced academically. The third of the 3, that's not his deal. He doesn't love school. He's warm, caring, is a huggy, loves to socialize, loves other kids. His construction skills are off the charts, and he's not sit down and learn how to read kind of child. So he's in a special school, and he's really improving with the special school. Okay? All right. So other questions? I love questions. I think they're always useful. Please.
I've heard about angels, and how do you differentiate angels versus souls?
Oh, good question. Okay, angels. So what's the difference, or is there a difference between angels and souls? So my understanding, again, from 22 years of listening to clients, and I don't tell them, they tell me, my understanding about angel energy, or the angelic kingdom, which I completely believe is valid, is that angelic energy usually does not incarnate. Underscore usually. I think there are rare circumstances. Angelic energy, or the angelic kingdom, or in the East we call that the Davic kingdom. Angelic energy is almost like a specialized divine energy that enervates the energy of an angel. And I totally believe angels are real. I have clients whose guides show up as angels. I think that's just completely valid. Okay, another question. Yes? So yes, it is a type of hypnosis. Regression therapy is the regression therapist, and I train people in past and between lives regression. There's information up here if anyone's interested. Regression therapy is guiding the client into a relaxed place. A lot of people misunderstand hypnosis. You hypnotize yourselves, we hypnotize ourselves every day of our life. When you're settling down either late in the day or whenever to relax, let's just say you listen to music, or you chat with your spouse, or you get a glass of tea or a glass of wine or whatever. If you're hooked up to EEG equipment, the cycles per second of your brain drop. They slow down. That is hypnotic trance. Okay? People think trance is something, probably not all of you, but think that someone puts you there, you can get stuck there, and then they have to bring you back. The answer to that is no. It's me assisting the client to relax through breathing, guided imagery, and metaphor. What happens in terms of the brain is that the right hemisphere opens and is operating along with the left hemisphere, so the linear intellectual awareness operates, and spiritual, intuitive, creative awareness operates at the same time, and I assist the client to use their intuition for past life information and soul level information to come forward. Yes?
I love these descriptions between the earth-based soul and extraterrestrial soul, because I think I have lived in the conflict of that. Is it possible that one parent can be an earth-based soul and the other one extraterrestrial? And what is there? The extraterrestrial, I know when I see that for a fact that my father's mother was referred to as being reptilian because she was very cold. They said she had ice in her veins. Very analytical, intelligent, distant. She's still the mystery in our family.
Right.
And she produced my father, who is still a mystery. And then the conflict between my mother, who's very earth-based, with a lot of warmth from my other grandmother, and the conflict between my parents that still prevails, even she's in the grave, and is still creating a lot of tension.
Right.
So, is that, couples, could that explain some of the tension in relationships?
It could. So the question is, let me see if I can put it, could it be that an earth-based soul is in a romantic relationship with an ET soul, and that creates conflict because they are so different? Is that accurate as your question? Maybe. and this is where, and I like the fact that, you know, for years I was a general psychologist, so I can couple that in with what I've learned about the soul. Yes, it's possible that ET versus Earth-based is the explanation for the distinct difference between, you know, your parents. At the same time, ET souls are not, in fact, they could be the opposite. ET souls are not always cold, flat. The reptilian piece, ET souls sometimes come from places that don't have human structure. And sometimes reptilian bodies, think about Avatar. Think about looking at those bodies of those beings in the movie Avatar. So souls that have had many lives elsewhere, the elsewhere may be a different kind of structure or sometimes no physical structure. So the reptilian piece could fit, but not necessarily the cold, flat, uncaring. That could come from this life. That could come from unresolved past life issues, but not necessarily ET married to Earth-based. That's a great question. Yeah. I think that it's not that we don't have ET souls that are our age range. Okay? And I know this is a wide age range, but it's not like there aren't ET souls that are the age of any of us in this room. But there are more ET souls probably under the age of 15 to 20. And we see it a lot in children. Our daughter used to call us, our daughter has two children, ages 9 and 6. And when one or the other of the children, especially the older one, was very, very small, when he would get sick, he would spike a very high fever, and it would be, high enough to be worried about convulsions. Except he never had convulsions. And this happened repetitively if he was sick. Well, from learning about ET souls, I learned that often ET souls, that's the way their little bodies burn off infection. You can read about this in some of the, not in my book, but in other other authors' books about these crystal, rainbow, indigo children that have been written about. And so after a period of time, when our grandson kept doing this, and then when his sister came along, she did it too, the high fevers, I just said to our daughter, and our daughter's not certainly as much into this as we are, and I said, honey, I just think that's the way her little body works, or his little body works. I don't belabor with the kids Earl and I are both quite convinced that our grandchildren are all ET souls, but it helps understand these children. If any of you, are on Facebook or Twitter, you know that periodically there's a posting, and it's a child that has these incredible abilities, whether they're singing or dancing or whatever they are. It's like a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old that can sing like an adult. Two thoughts. One, I think often those children are not from here, or it could be or they're just bringing forward skills they had in past lives. And that's why those skills show up at such an early age, is because they had these skills in a past life. So, yes?
I know it's a big subject, but you touched on what goes on in between lives. Can you just sort of expand on that a little bit? I understand about the nursery thing and how we can learn to become guides ourselves, but maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so what do we do when we're between lives? Well, I would say the simplest explanation, let me give this kind of two pieces. The simplest explanation is if we're not a young soul, we have more and more responsibility in the spiritual realm. Okay? Now, that's not to say that we don't. I've had clients describe gardens, cooking. It's obviously all ethereal, but I have clients who describe it. They have their garden, just like You know, for those of you that love to garden, you can talk to my husband who loves to garden. That those kinds of activities do exist. Play, relaxation, that does exist. At the same time, the more evolved we are, actually, I'm going to back up a step. Let me back up an extra step, okay, before I say what I'm about to say to try to make this more clear. When you come into body, perhaps all of you know this, when we get ready to incarnate, not only do we plan our life, not only do we contract, and this may, you may think, why did I choose this soul as my mother? Why did I choose this soul as my father? So on and so forth. We create a whole plan, okay? And when we come into body, we bring a holographic portion, or a fractal, you might say, of our soul energy. We never bring 100% of our soul energy into these bodies. Why? 2 reasons. One is, and I've heard this far more than once, our soul, of course, is pure energy. It's divine energy. I have heard many times we would blow the circuits of this physical vehicle. We would. That's what I don't tell the client, they tell me. This body couldn't contain 100% of your soul energy. And we always have a higher self. Okay? We are divine in body, all of us sitting in this room. Your soul is in spirit at the same time your soul is in body. The more you evolve, even in body, you are expected, I think that's a fair word, to operate more from your soul wisdom than from your human frailties. We all have human frailties, okay? So in the time between lives, at all times, if we have responsibility in the spiritual realm, we are, in an ongoing way, conducting that responsibility. It almost, yes, again, I'm trying to take a subject that, like when I teach people to guide between lives regression, it's a 5-day training, and there's a lot of material that relates to these kinds of questions. When you pass, or when you transition, instead of using the word die, when your soul leaves your body at the ending of a life, my understanding is that one or the other of these options occur almost immediately, relatively speaking. If there's a need for healing, let's say you've had a very complicated life, let's say you had a very lengthy, debilitating illness, often your guides immediately take you to a place of healing. And for some clients, and some of this is written in both books, there are client examples of this in both books. Sometimes the place of healing is not described by the client, except I'm told my guide has taken me to a place of healing and I need a little bit of silence. And there's no description. Or sometimes there's incredible description of waterfalls, rainbow light, a myriad of means of healing. The other activity that happens immediately when you cross over, and both of these will happen. The healing will happen first if it's needed. When we leave this body, we are met by guides. We all have more than one spiritual guide. We have a primary guide, and then we have a panel of elder teachers. We are met by our panel of elder teachers, and we are asked to do what you might call a life review. So let's just use me as an example. So Linda finishes this life and she crosses over. I will likely, I don't know for sure, but I will be met probably immediately by this panel of teachers. Okay? It's a little bit like a tribunal. Okay? In the most positive sense, it's a little bit like a tribunal. And this group of guides, especially the more evolved you are, will say, can you talk to us about what you intended to accomplish in that life you just finished? And how do you feel you did? The bottom line is they expect us to be honest. If in the early years of raising children, we were mildly abusive with our children, they expect us to be honest. Will they forgive us? Absolutely yes. The goal is to be straightforward and to be honest. If we, fancy word, obfuscate, if we avoid, they don't like that. Okay? All they want is honesty. They are not going to shake their finger at us and, send us off to some problematic place. I have to say this. In all the years that I've done regression, I have never had a client say they crossed over and they went to a place that they called hell. Never. In more regressions than I can count. I think if there is something that might be hellacious, it's here at times. Okay? So once we go through that questioning, interrogation process, then we may be preparing for the next life. We may be preparing other souls. We do. Many of us have younger souls that we prepare for incarnation, not just the nursery, but that we guide. We may have students that we work with, but we may also be working with the council that manages and coordinates Earth. There is a council, I've heard about it far more than one time. It's almost like the parliament that exists in spirit. If you are an MP, what they say in England, you're an MP, a member of parliament, you've worked really hard in a lot of lives to reach that point. There is also an interplanetary council. There is a council that has representatives from Earth and other bodies, other celestial bodies, that meet to coordinate. Trust me, if you had met me 20 years ago and you would talk to me about these subjects, I'm afraid my eyes would roll back in my head. Really. Because I wasn't in the... And Spock with those ears? Somebody knew about that.
Why don't we take one more question?
Okay, let's do one more question. Yes.
In regard to when before you were born, do you have a choice of who you're going to be born to, or does people up there say this is where you're going, or?
Okay, good question. So do you have the choice of, who are going to be your parents? Or is it selected? If you're a younger soul, it's probably selected. More often than not, it's selected. If you're a more progressed soul, you have a lot of say in the process of what are you going to learn in current life, what are your intentions in current life, what souls will serve best in those roles. And I shouldn't say believe it or not, but we do sometimes choose souls as our parents, and the script reads, sometimes includes abuse. Why? Either we're learning how to withstand that, we're teaching how that's not appropriate, or something like that. And even in the case of adoption, the souls of the adopted parents are also part of the plan. So if there's adoption in your family, assume that adoptive parents are just as, I'll say, chosen as any other method, biological or adopted.